Welcome in. I'm Doug with David A.R. White, and we're going to talk about a lot of things, not the least of which is the brand new movie, God's Not Dead, We the People, coming to theaters October 4th through the 6th. David, thank you so much for making time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, we want to talk about the new film, and I've got a myriad of questions, but I want to go back to the beginning. And as you're working on the very first God's Not Dead movie, are you even having any idea what it's going to do and what's going to come next, or we're working on this movie now?
Yeah, no, that's all it was, is we were just working on that movie in 2012, and then we felt like that was our first theatrical, really. We really felt like we were supposed to take that movie theatrically, and it wasn't an easy thing to go from home entertainment, into the theaters and learn about that whole system, but obviously, when God's Not Dead came out, it was a very big surprise at opening weekend. We just went above and beyond everybody's expectation, and obviously everybody started calling, and they all had the same questions of who is PureFlix and what is God's Not Dead. So, yeah.
So I have to imagine it was mind blowing. I mean, I don't know how that all works in the movie. I think you get the first weekend's results. You're looking at the numbers. Yeah. You're going, who knew?
Yeah, who knew? And and everybody, Access Hollywood, Entertainment Tonight, LA Times, New York Times, everybody called, and they literally all had the same questions. Like, they were trying to just scratch their heads about, hey, this Christian little movie studio, and how in the world did they release this thing that all of a sudden everybody is going to? What is going on? And they'd sit around and we learned later that the agencies and the studios would sit around in these war rooms talking about we have to do that thing that God's Not Dead thing did, that which is just a testament to God, the faithfulness of the Lord, and
right.
When His hand is on something, that no matter how small it is. I mean, it was a little movie. It was made for $1.2 million. It was a very small movie that but it just resonated with people. It got people talking about God and conversations of God, and specifically that one was in the colleges, and that drew people to it.
So do you think then that makes, because Hollywood understands, sarcastically I say, the one color of green. So if they understand that something's going to make money, then they want to try to replicate that.
Yes.
So was it just like, okay, this is just another itch we can scratch and try to get money from this demographic, or did they think, wait a minute, the world needs something better values, more God-centered? What was the impact?
Yeah, I mean, at this time, when we started PureFlix in 2005, me and Russell Wolf and Michael Scott, and there was really no footprint for faith in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. The Passion had come out in 2001, something like that, and obviously Mel Gibson, shocked the world with that. But none of the studios had a label at that point. And then so PureFlix started. We were doing home entertainment movies, and then around the Kendricks now had started releasing theatricals through Sony.
Okay.
I think Fireproof and Courageous they had only done. But then when God's Not Dead came out, it did $64 million in the box, mm-hmm. especially at that budget. Not very many people know this, but God's Not Dead. It's like what I think shocked most people is it's the 5th most profitable movie in cinema history based on its ROI.
Really?
Its return on investment, because it was such a small budget and the prints and advertising dollars were so small. And that's the thing that, God uses the small things to confound the wise. And that's when Hollywood then started doing the faith labels. And Universal got involved, Lionsgate got involved. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think we see more faith movies these days.
Well, I guess it makes me think about, what was it, as far as Sony acquiring PureFlix last year, mm-hmm. that has to be like, oh my gosh, Sony that means it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that's a little bit, you have your ups and downs, right? And for us, when we released God's Not Dead, we were, it's like the Lord takes you to that breaking point almost, mm-hmm. That brink. For us, we had a terrible time raising that money, and no one wanted God's Not Dead. Nobody wanted it. Like, the studios didn't want it. We offered it because we couldn't raise the money for it. And so, but then God delivered through that and again revived the company. And so in 2015, we started the PureFlix.com, which is an SVOD is what they call it.
Okay.
It's called Streaming Video on Demand, which is very similar to Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, those type of streaming service. But faith-centered, there's over 10,000 titles, and they're all clean and, God-honoring. And so, faith and family. So in 2020, COVID hit. I don't know if you've heard of this thing.
I heard about that.
And, and it was hard on a whole lot of people and businesses and everything. And we were struggling. We had put in 11 million of our own dollars into this platform. It was a struggle to compete with the giants, basically. And when COVID happened, people were home and they started, and all of a sudden the Lord, once again, He raised PureFlix.
Wow.
From the brink one more time of whether or not we were going to fall off and have to close shop or lay people off or all those things. And so I go back to this over and over. God has us in the waiting room for a reason. He stretches us to teach us. That faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not yet seen. And that's how, we were. And when Sony came in, obviously he lifted PureFlix up with COVID. And again, I think he allowed the studios then to realize, oh, wow, there is, people of faith in our land that obviously radio, I mean, obviously there's, radio stations have been, for Christian radio has been, huge for so many years. But the film industry is always, I always said we're 20 years behind you guys. We're, and so, Sony was the perfect partner for us. And we were honored that in the end of 2020, when the world seems to be collapsing around, God lifted up His entity and said, I want to use this for my glory.
So we'll put that on the list of, we call them pandemic positives. So there's
pandemic positives,
one
yeah.
of those
Sony, yeah.
that happened. So does that mean that you have a little more ability or margin to do more things of what you want and pursue other projects?
I mean, it's PureFlix, Affirm Films, and Sony, and Sony's obviously paying for these productions now going forward, and they've given us really a license to keep doing what we, the passion and the vision behind. They're not trying to change us, and that was a big fear going in. Is anytime a big corporate conglomerate comes in and wants to be involved in your business. It's a scary thing, but it really felt like the right thing to do, and it is allowing us to do more higher quality and more productions.
Okay. Well, then let's talk about the new one. October 4th through the 6th in theaters.
Yeah.
God's Not Dead, We the People. I guess the first question would be, of all the topics you could have covered or of all the things that could have been in this latest film, why this topic?
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, this script, the whole purpose of God's Not Dead, right, is always to open up conversations with God in different places. So in the first one, it was the college campus, and the second one, it was the high school, and then it went in God's Not Dead, A Light in Darkness. It was in the community, and the natural fit is, well, where do you go after that? But ironically, this script was written before God's Not Dead, A Light in Darkness.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the bones of it were written,
Okay.
once again by Chuck Konzelman and Carrie Solomon from the first God's Not Dead writers. And homeschooling didn't really seem relevant at the time. But through COVID, obviously, we've all, been awakened to what is homeschool, because we all had to do it. If you had children, you had to do it. And to some extent, and then you have Europe, who's banning homeschooling in a lot of ways. And so this is the backdrop of this whole political intrigue, it starts in this homeschooling little family that is doing this, just trying to honor the Lord and teach their children the way that they believe that God wants them to do that. And in the process, the community comes in and wants to shut them down, because they want to control exactly what they're teaching and take God out of that equation, which then obviously spills into Washington, D.C. And there we have the backdrop of a whole incredible, I think, movie that deals with the things that are going on right now. Where does the government stop, and where is it right for the government to be involved in our lives?
It feels very timely, and the trailer is amazing. I'm trying to remember the one line that the guy says in the trailer, the Politico guy, kind of like, once we decide what kids need to know, like, we're going to tell them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which, in concept, it's understandable that that you would have obviously, there would be some level of government involvement in how much we're teaching our children, for math and science and those things. But when it comes to religion, Ronald Reagan has this great quote at the beginning of this in the trailer, and it talks about freedom is a fragile thing, and if we're not careful, that can go away. And he talks about how the generations of, like, as those freedoms are stripped away, you're never able to get that freedom back. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing right now in our country is parts of that, and that's a scary thing. And I think that's why this movie is so relevant.
So is there a particular takeaway that you hope people have? What would you envision the discussion being as a family's just seen it, they're in the car, and what are they talking about?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, obviously, it has to be entertaining. This is an entertaining movie. It is inspiring, hopefully, and they walk away with, again, it's the heart of what the God's Not Dead franchise was built on, is the opening up conversations of God, in these different places. And this is opening up conversations also about government, about where do we draw the line? How far do they reach into our lives? At what point do they decide and do we decide? I think those are some of it, and most importantly is just about the faithfulness of God, and that in the midst of these struggles, in the midst of the trials and tribulations that that we're going through, and everybody's going through in different ways, that God is faithful and that He does show up, and that ultimately this movie would inspire people.
Now, a couple weeks ago, in that chair, we had Francesca Battistelli.
Oh, wow.
And we talked about the film and other things. What was it like working with Franny on the movie?
Well, I'll tell you this, is she was probably way more well-spoken than I was here. You know what? Francesca was a doll. It's interesting to me because I find myself, okay, so I was on a show called Evening Shade with Burt Reynolds in the 90s. And at the time, I would go on the show, and because I was raised Mennonite, the joke is always, if you don't know anything about the Mennonites, it makes the Mormons look like a pack of Hell's Angels. Right?
Okay.
So, right? So, I mean, I grew up conservative. I saw one movie in the theater the first 18 years of my life. I didn't know, so when I got to Hollywood, the only thing I knew about Evening Shade was Burt Reynolds. Mm-hmm. But on this show also, everybody else had won an Oscar, an Emmy, or a Tony winner. People like Hal Holbrook, Ozzie Davis, Ruby Dee, Elizabeth Ashley, Charles Durning. I mean, like these people, and then they'd have these guest spots on Kenny Rogers, Dom DeLuise, Billy Bob Thornton, Terry Bradshaw, people that I had never heard of. I didn't know anything about them until after I worked with them, and then I'd go home and I'd start to watch their movies and their things that they did, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, like I'm like, here I was hanging out with them for weeks at a time with very little knowledge of who they were. And I have to say that I've done that throughout my career, maybe because I have children and I don't remember anything, possibly because I'm busy, or I'm just not capable of quite understanding it before I go in. And so Franny, we call her Franny, Francesca, it was similar. She came to us and it really, she was perfect for it. She's a homeschooling mom. Mm-hmm. She's a wonderful actress. And I knew she was a singer and had sold millions of albums and had, some Grammys and things like that. But I didn't really know her songs until after the production. And then I started listening to, my Siri and my worship music in the mornings. Sure. And all of a sudden it's Francesca Battistelli. And I'm like, wait, the Franny's does this one? I know this song.
Holy Spirit, come on.
I totally know this song. And I mean, so many of her songs we've been singing in church forever. And she's obviously an extreme talent, and so it was an honor to work with her, but on the flip side, maybe that's a good thing. You don't know everything that people have done, and obviously people I think have similar reactions with me too. and a lot of people don't even know that I was one of the creators of PureFlix. So,
Well, I would imagine that when you're talking about the evening shade thing and all that, going in, I guess, good or bad, you're just taking people at face value as opposed
Totally.
to being intimidated or the other half.
yeah, I mean, I knew Burt Reynolds only from Smokey and the Bandit,
Right.
but I didn't know Burt Reynolds did anything other than that.
Right. What was that like? What was Burt Reynolds like? Obviously, that begs the question of, are all these people genuine? Or...
Burt was, I say Burt gave me my start in Hollywood. He really did. I was 19. He put me on a show. I went on there with one line, and he gave me a recurring role on that show for almost 4 years. And he was like my dad in a way, my Hollywood dad, because I would do a scene or whatever, and I remember I would always look over to Burt for his approval, because I didn't, again, growing up as a Mennonite, we didn't even have a drama program, so I never had any acting classes.
Wow.
I mean, I started studying it, when I was like a little bit in Chicago for that 18 to 19-year-old, from that year. And then, I was interested in it, but I really wasn't a trained actor at all. And so I would look to him for his approval and help, and he was very giving to me. He did fire me 3.5 years later.
Okay.
For that's a whole other story. But the cool thing is that through PureFlix.com I got to do a sitcom called Hitting the Brakes, and I had to cast my dad, who was used to be an alcoholic, a womanizer, a gambler. Who would be the perfect person to do that?
Not stereotyping.
And Burt Reynolds came to my mind, and I wrote him a long email. It had been 20 years since I had seen him, over 20 years, and I said, would you play this? Would you play my dad? And it would mean a lot to me, and so he did, and I spent. It's a voiceover thing that he does from the as he's passed.
Oh, okay.
On the thing, and so I went to Florida and spent 3 days with him, and it was just how the Lord brings the irony of life. God brings things full circle in so many different ways, and for me, it was closure to something that I'm so glad that I had that time with him, because obviously Burt is gone from us now, but. I love Burt Reynolds, and I can't say enough about him. And he also, one other thing that he did for me was, from an early age on, I'd moved, my dad was a pastor, and so I moved around a lot, but is that he gave me I looked around, and all those people were his friends. And he was working with those people for over 30 years. Everybody on Evening Shade that came on as those guest spots, he knew. And that was extraordinary to watch as a kid and go. And this is before, Adam Sandler now works with all his friends. Like, all these people do that now. But I had that thing back then going, man, I want to work with my family, so to speak. And if you watch a lot of the PureFlix movies, I've cast almost every single one of them. And you'll see recurring people over and over and over and over again. And in part because they're my family. I consider them my family, and I love loyalty. And that's what Burt Reynolds really did well.
Yeah. Loyalty is key. And I don't know, I'm a big fan of Dragnet, the old-time radio show and the television show, and I'm in the process of reading through a couple of biographies about Jack Webb, and he was a similar person. He got folks that got it, that had a good work ethic, and he used them.
Yeah.
If you watch the Dragnet TV shows, you see the dozen or so people playing all the different roles and the things. So there's something to be said.
I didn't know that.
For loyalty. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was very loyal, even casting a lot of people from the radio show on the television show when they did it in the 70s. But
wow, that's neat.
It's an interesting little.
Well, now, and so now you see Adam Sandler do it with all of his buddies. There's a whole host of whoever has that, is able to hire their friends. They do that in different ways. I've seen them pop up over the years, and so I'm like, yeah, I understand that.
Well, I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the parenting side of things and the challenge that we face, be it a single parent or two parents in the household, in trying to deal with our kids and technology we didn't grow up with and entertainment and all that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. Children, I have 3 of them, and they're, between the ages of 8 and 15. And, there's the iPads, the phones, they don't watch television very much. I mean, that's one of my favorite things to do with them is to watch a movie, where all of us sit around and we do that and are encouraged by it. And so, I'm not here to promote PureFlix. I'm here to promote God's Not Dead, We the People. But PureFlix is an unbelievably safe place to bring your kids and your family. And there's so many now with even Sony's, partnership with us has so many amazing, the content and the library on there is so vast that you'll never get through it all. But it's clean.
Yeah.
And it's not even just Sony's. I mean, we have studio movies from everywhere, from Universal, Lionsgate, everywhere. But it's just safe, and that's, I'm sure as parents, you don't really love everything that your kids are watching on their YouTube,
right,
or their phone or TikTok, especially if they're not going to my TikTok at David A.R. White.
What would you say to someone who may be in a position where you found yourself at 19, wanting to get in and do something that can feel bigger than yourself, and you face the challenges and the struggles? Like, what was the encouragement? What was the thing that kept you going, especially being apparently such a fish out of water of not living in this media world growing up and then diving headlong?
Yeah. I mean, you find that, I wrote a book about this called Between Heaven and Hollywood, Chasing Your God-Given Dream. And I think it's about finding the dream that's inside of you, right? That's from Him that you are to pursue. And whatever that is, pursue it with your whole heart and be excellent at your giftedness. And, even though I grew up on a farm practically and as a Mennonite and didn't have any understanding of the entertainment industry, really. When I got to Hollywood, it became my focus. Well, God's first, but your focus after that to say, okay, how do I become the best at this craft that I believe God's calling me to do? And I there's no doubt about it. There's a lot of luck involved in Hollywood, or that people fall into different places. But ultimately, you only last if you're good and if you're excellent at what you do. And so I just encourage kids, whatever they want to do, wherever they're at, if they want to go in the entertainment industry, to really know it and to be good at it.
Okay. So I guess it begs the question, what was the first movie that you saw of your only movie in the first 18 years of your life?
This is ironic, and it sounds like a setup here, but I didn't set this up. But I remember sitting in the theater when I was like 9 years old and watching Olivia Newton-John in black tights and thinking for sure I am going to hell. It was Grease.
From Grease to God's Not Dead. I love
But here's the irony. This is the irony of God. And not a lot of people know this, and I don't even know why I am. All right, but here's the irony of the whole thing, is that I saw that one movie, right? And then you fast forward 30 years or 20 or however many years.
Yeah.
And God's Not Dead becomes the 5th most profitable movie in cinema history based on its ROI. And you know what number 4 was?
Was it Grease?
Grease.
Really?
Yeah.
So here,
right next to it. So there's those two movies.
Yeah.
Somehow in the universe, in some weird way.
That's a God wink, right there.
That's a God wink that says, I'm going to put your movie, this movie about God's Not Dead, up right next to Olivia Newton-John's Grease.
That's awesome.